Welcome to our new teaching. This is an end-time teaching, and there's a lot to say about this. These are 15-minute videos, and so you're going to have to bear with me and just follow along. I'm going to begin in Daniel chapter 12, verse 9, where the angel was bringing Daniel the answer to his inquiry to the Lord of what's going to happen with the people of God at the end of time. What happens? Where is the end? We're not just going to be destroyed from the earth, are we? What happens? And so the angel brings him the signs of the end and what will happen with the people of the covenant. And then in verse 9 he says this to Daniel at the conclusion of his revelation. He says, "Go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed until the time of the end." And so I'm entitling this series "At the Time of the End," because the very things revealed to Daniel we are experiencing, and the world is about to experience. So this is at the time of the end. Okay. So what do we mean by the time of the end? What did the angel mean when he said that to Daniel? The end of what? Who does it affect? When will it come? Who brings it about? And can you escape it? These are things that we hear all the time. These are things that have been asked of me for years. The other things that have been asked, very common, how do we know it's real? Haven't many people said for centuries that they were at the time of the end and they were wrong? The time of the end is the same thing, the same time period that Jesus spoke of in Matthew chapter 24. Let's go there. I'm going to go there on screen too, if you'd like to follow me there. And verse 3. Oops. Okay. Reading from the NAS. Matthew 24, verse 3. He was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the Lord, and the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" The end of the age? What age? So what does he mean by the end of the age? Now, as you read chapter 24 of Matthew, you see Jesus is describing the time of the end. Many of the same things that Daniel has been shown. Jesus is saying, these are the signs of my coming. And this is what will happen at the consummation, it actually says in the Greek, of the age. In other words, an ending of the age. So we see that the end, or the time of the end, is actually a consummation of an age. Now, you have hopefully all worked with me through all the videos of the ages. An age is a time period. It has a beginning and an end. That was the wonderful revelation in the teaching of the ages here on our website, is seeing that the Bible does teach that there is an end of torment in hell. There's an age that everybody must suffer. The Bible tells us what that age is. It says, whatever a man sows, he will reap. Now we know, and it says so throughout the scripture, that most of the wicked sow wickedness most of their lives and then die a peaceful death. And that's always been one of the great mysteries to the righteous is, how come I'm dying a terrible death and they die a peaceful death and yet they've been wicked their whole life? Well, here's the revelation. Don't worry. Don't worry. The Lord is the one who repays. The Lord is the one who brings vengeance. And whatsoever that man sowed, he will reap on the other side. He won't reap more than he sowed. And what human or even angel can reap eternity? Or can sow eternity, excuse me. How can you sow an eternal punishment, an eternal sin? None of us are eternal. We're weak, so we can't. The only eternal being is God. We're not eternal. We will not end our days from this day forward, but we had a beginning. See? So we're not eternal. Eternal means having no beginning and no end. Isn't that amazing? So a man cannot reap eternal punishment if he can't sow eternal punishment. He can't sow an eternal sin, so he can't reap an eternal punishment. That's what I mean to say. So an age, it's a time period, the end of the age. What age is Jesus talking about? What age is Daniel talking about? We know that the Lord is describing the apocalypse, seen in the book of Daniel and in the book of Revelations. And so as we study the book of Revelations, we see there is an end of an age. And it's the same thing we see in Daniel. It's the same thing that we see in Matthew 24, Luke 21. And it's this: it is the end of man's rule on the earth. It's the end of man's rule on the earth and the beginning of Christ's rule on the earth. Man's rule is an age, and it takes up the vast majority of this earth's time to exist. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let me just back up here just a little bit. People have complained and said, you know, the apostles said they were in the end times. And they clearly weren't, because they all lived and some grew old and died. Most were murdered, but the Lord didn't come back. So they weren't in the end times. That's not true. They were in the end times, and they knew it. They even said they were in the end times. Acts chapter 2, verses 1 through 21. The discourse of the early church. And they said, here in the end times. They knew they were in the end times. They weren't wrong about that. How come? People wonder, well, wait a minute. They said they were in the end times, yet the end didn't come. Well, wait a minute. You're limiting end times to their lifetime. That's not how the Jews looked at it. Let me clarify this for you. The end times began with the birth of Christ. Actually, it began with the conception of Christ. Because in the Jewish mind, one day with the Lord is 1,000 years. We see that in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. One day with the Lord is 1,000 years. The Jews taught there are 7 days in a week, right? There are also 7 days of God's days for this creation. From Adam to the birth of Christ, to the conception of Christ, was 4,000 years or 4 days. You're allowed 7 days, right? You've only got 3 left. You're in the last days. You're at the time of the end. With the conception of Christ, the last days began. That was it. That was the big sign. That was the major sign to see. Was the coming of the light of God into the world at Hanukkah, and then birthed in September and visible to man. So they were in the end times. And when Jesus began his ministry, and the apostles saw this is the Messiah, then they started saying, oh, we surely are in the end times now, because we see him. We see the Messiah. We see the light of God. And so they knew for sure we are in the end times. There's only 3 days left. They were hoping the Lord would come back during their lifetime so Israel could rule for the church age, which is a little over 2,000 years. But it didn't happen. The Lord hasn't come back yet. But that's all right. He's not late. He's not late. This is the timing of God. So listen, man rules for 6 days, 6,000 years. The 6,000 years ended somewhere around 2003, right around there. But it's interesting because the Lord has shown us through types, very clearly through types, that he doesn't come back at the end of the 2,000 years. He comes back in the beginning of the 3,000 years, the third millennium since the conception. Isn't that interesting? So really, we have begun the third millennium. We're almost 20 years into it now. And so it's amazing time. It's amazing time. But we are in the last days. We're in the last minutes of the last days. As we go on, you'll see this. And soon will come the beginning of the seventh day, or the day of rest. That's when man quits ruling, except through Christ. Man will rule, but it'll be righteous rule through a righteous king. One world king, and it'll be Christ. And the foolishness of man and the foolishness of sin will be gone. And it will not be allowed. That's the seventh day. After that, this entire creation is rolled up like a scroll and put on a library shelf. And everybody is on the other side, ready to begin our next journey in the Lord. Okay, we'll end there for our beginning. Lord bless you.